Once there was a she-wolf who was good for nothing. That's what they said. No pack of origin, no name of value, no beauty that opened doors or lineage that sealed deals. She had grown up on the borders of Varric territory, the way things grow that no one planted. Stubbornly, without permission, without the slightest consideration for the inconvenience she caused those who preferred she didn't exist. Saraphina had learned early that existing without authorization was her greatest crime. She had learned it at the summer festival, when the crown prince had looked at her across a room full of she-wolves with pedigrees and titles, and had chosen her. For something that had no name in any treaty, and that the elders, for that very reason, called an error of judgment. The error had lasted 2 years of whispers. Then it had become 7 heartbeats beneath her hands. 7. Not 1, which would have been ordinary. Not 2, which would have been manageable. 7. The number that made Saraphina not merely inconvenient, but impossible to ignore, and therefore impossible to allow to survive. She didn't know that yet. On the night everything changed. She only knew that she had heard 4 words through a wall. Make the arrangements. And that those 4 words had transformed every survival instinct she possessed into a single direction. Get out. Now. Whatever it cost. She ran through the dark corridors of the castle that had been her prison for 8 months. She ran with enemy boots echoing behind her, and 7 lives pulsing beneath her hands and no exit ahead. Only old stone, sealed hallways, and walls that did not open for she-wolves who had nowhere to go. Until one opened. A wall that had no seam, no handle, no reason to exist as a door, simply opened beneath her palms, and behind it was a staircase descending into the dark, into the smell of iron and ancient earth, and something that had not seen light in 300 years. Saraphina descended, and what she found down there changed not only her life, but the fate of an entire territory that had spent years trying to convince her that she didn't deserve to belong to it. She didn't know in that moment that the staircase had not been discovered by chance. It had been found because it was waiting. For 300 years waiting for her. If you love intense wolf stories with destiny and twists, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. And how about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, the author of these stories. And you? Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. The first contraction hit Saraphina like a fist to the spine. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the corridor and breathed through her teeth. Slow, controlled, silent. Because silence was the only thing keeping her alive right now. Somewhere behind her, past the iron door she had barely managed to close in time, boots echoed against the castle floor. Heavy boots. Coordinated. At least 4 wolves, maybe 6, moving with the kind of quiet precision that meant they were not searching randomly. They were tracking her. Stay still. Don't shift. Don't make a sound. Her wolf surged against the instruction, that wild, desperate part of her that wanted to run, to fight, to bare her teeth at every wolf who had spent the last 8 months treating her like a problem to be solved. But Saraphina held herself together through sheer force of will. One hand braced flat against the stone, the other pressed to the enormous curve of her belly. 7 heartbeats pulsed beneath her palm. 7 small, fierce, impossibly stubborn lives that had no idea their mother was currently hiding in a dark corridor in the east wing of Castle Varric, with no plan, no ally, and approximately 4 minutes before the King's Guard found her. Stay with me, she thought at them. Just a little longer. Please. The smallest one. She had taken to calling him Storm in her mind, because he kicked harder than the others and seemed constitutionally opposed to rest, kicked her ribs as if to say, "We're right here. Don't you dare give up now." She almost laughed. She swallowed it instead. 12 hours ago, she had still believed she was safe. 12 hours ago, she had been sitting in the room they had given her. Not a guest chamber, not a prison cell, something in between, with a lock on the outside and a window too narrow to climb through. eating the food that was left on a tray twice daily, and trying to convince herself that Lord Cassiel's promises meant something. You will be protected, Saraphina, until the birth, until we understand what the pups represent. No harm will come to you inside these walls. She had wanted to believe him. Moons, she had needed to believe him, because the alternative, that she had walked willingly into the den of the man who hated her more than anyone alive, was too terrible to sit with. She had believed him for exactly 63 days. Then, last night, she had heard the conversation through the wall. Two voices. Cassiel's, smooth, controlled, the voice of a man who had been planning things for a very long time, and another she didn't immediately recognize, low and deliberate, with the particular flatness of someone who delivers bad news as a routine professional service. The council will not support a claim from 7 marked pups, not unless the mother, Cassiel had said, and his voice had shifted into something she had never heard from him before, something scraped clean of every performance, is not part of the plan past the birth. Make the arrangements. That was all she'd needed. She'd been moving since midnight. The boots were closer now. Saraphina counted her breaths. In for 4, out for 4. The way the old midwife had taught her in the village where she'd grown up, before the Alpha's second son had noticed her at a harvest gathering and upended every plan she'd ever made for a quiet, ordinary life. In for 4. Out for 4. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. Her body was currently carrying 7 wolf pups at 36 weeks of supernatural gestation and had just been asked to sprint down 3 flights of stairs in the dark while being hunted by trained royal guards. Her body had opinions about this situation. Another contraction rolled through her. Slower this time, more of a warning than an attack. She recognized the feeling from the book she'd stolen out of the castle library during the first weeks of her confinement, the ones on shifter midwifery that described what happened when stress triggered early labor. Not now, she told her body firmly. I need 20 more minutes. 30. Give me 30, and I will rest. I promise. The boots stopped. Saraphina pressed herself harder against the stone and stopped breathing entirely. A door opened. Not the one behind her, but a door further down the corridor she hadn't noticed. Light spilled through. She heard one guard mutter something to another. A reply. The sound of a door being checked, a handle rattled, a wall tapped. They were doing a systematic sweep. She had maybe 2 minutes before they reached her section of corridor. She turned and looked at the wall behind her. It was just a wall. Stone, like every other stone in Castle Varek. Old and gray and slightly damp in the way of things that have been holding secrets for centuries. There was nothing remarkable about it. No seam, no handle, no obvious mechanism. The kind of wall you looked at and looked past and never thought about again. Saraphina thought about it now, because she had absolutely nothing else. She pressed both hands flat against the stone. A desperate, instinctive gesture. The kind you make when logic has run out and your body decides to try something it cannot entirely explain. The stone was warm. She went very still. Stone should not be warm. Not here. Not in this corridor. Not at this hour with the autumn chill seeping through every crack in the castle's ancient bones. But the wall beneath her palms pulsed with a steady, low warmth, the way skin felt warm, the way living things felt warm, like something is breathing on the other side. The boots were moving again. Saraphina pressed harder, and something in her chest, that strange, wordless sense she'd had her whole life that the world was trying to tell her something if she would only listen, pulled. She felt it the moment before it happened, a vibration in the stone, low and resonant, like a note played on an instrument with no name. The warmth intensified under her palms, and then, without sound, without mechanism, without any reason that made sense, the wall opened. Not dramatically. Not with grinding stone and rushing wind and the theatrical fanfare of ancient magic announcing itself. It simply shifted. A seam appeared where there had been no seam. A section of wall about her width swung inward on some invisible axis, smooth and silent, as if it had been waiting with the patient confidence of something that knew it would be needed eventually. Cool air exhaled from the darkness beyond. It smelled of iron and something older. Earth and old wood, and a particular mineral sharpness she had no name for. The scent of deep places that had not seen light in a very long time. A staircase descended into the dark. Saraphina stared at it for exactly 1 second. The boots rounded the far end of the corridor. She stepped through the wall. It closed behind her without a sound. She stood in total darkness, both hands out in front of her, heart slamming so hard against her ribs, she was certain the guards on the other side could hear it. She counted, 1, 2, 3, listening for the sound of the wall being found, being opened, boots pouring through. Nothing. The footsteps passed. Muffled, growing distant, then gone. She exhaled. The darkness was complete and absolute. She could see nothing, hear nothing beyond the steady drip of water somewhere far below, and the 7 heartbeats beneath her hands that pulsed with quiet, unwavering life. "We're here," Storm seemed to say, kicking once. "Keep going." Saraphina put one hand on the wall, cold again now, ordinary stone, as if the warmth had transferred its purpose and was done, and began to descend. The stairs were narrow and very old, worn in the center from the passage of many feet over many years. Someone had used these stairs. Someone had used them often enough to leave their path in the stone. She counted steps as she went, partly to stay grounded, partly because her mind needed something to hold on to that wasn't Cassiel's voice saying, "Make the arrangements." 14 steps, 20, 30. The stairs curved, and the darkness changed quality. Not lighter, but different. A faint luminescence clung to the stone walls, subtle as foxfire, the kind that revealed shapes without fully illuminating them. Enough to see by. Just barely. Enough to see what was at the bottom of the stairs. Saraphina stopped on the last step and stared. The room was not large, circular, perhaps 20 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling that rose into shadow. Old braziers lined the walls, cold and long dead. The floor was smooth stone, covered in dust except for one area, a wide circle near the center, where the dust had been cleared away at some recent point, the marks of a broom still faintly visible. In the center of the cleared circle stood a stone pedestal, and on the pedestal, glowing with the same soft foxfire warmth as the walls, was a mark. Not carved, alive. Shifting, slow and deliberate, like light moving through water. A circle within a circle, with 7 points radiating outward from the center. 7. The same number that pulsed in her belly. The same number that Lord Cassiel had spent 8 months calling a catastrophe, a curse, an impossibility that threatened the stability of every pack in the Northern Territories. 7 points on the mark. 7 pups in her womb. Saraphina walked to the pedestal slowly, her hand still on her belly, her eyes fixed on the shifting light. Her wolf was not snarling now. Her wolf was still, in the deep focused way that happened when something ancient recognized something older than itself. She reached out. Her fingertips were an inch from the mark when a voice behind her said, dryly and without apparent alarm, "I wouldn't touch that yet, lamb. Last woman who touched it went into labor immediately. Though I suppose, looking at you, that ship may have already sailed." Saraphina spun. In the shadows beside one of the dead braziers, sitting on an upturned crate with the relaxed posture of someone who had been waiting here for quite some time and had made her peace with the inconvenience, was a very old woman. She was perhaps 65, perhaps older. The kind of age that becomes impossible to pin down, because the woman wearing it had clearly decided age was a number, and she was not particularly interested in numbers. She had silver-white hair pinned up with what appeared to be a soup ladle. She wore a castle servant's apron over a wool dress that had seen better decades. and she was looking at Saraphina with the particular expression of someone who finds the universe deeply, personally inconvenient on a routine basis. "You're real," Saraphina said, because this felt necessary to establish. "Disappointingly so," the old woman said. "My name is Agatha. I've been the under-kitchen supervisor in this castle for 31 years, which means I know where every secret staircase goes, who built them, and why, and also where they hide the good tea." She tilted her head toward Saraphina's belly with the clinical interest of someone who had assisted at enough births to have opinions. "How far apart are the contractions?" Saraphina blinked. "You know about the contractions?" "You've been gripping that wall for the last 10 minutes, Agatha said. "I can hear you breathing. I may be old, but I'm not deaf." She stood, groaning slightly in a way that suggested her knees had their own opinions about abandoned staircase sitting. "Come here, child. Sit down before you fall down. You're going to need your strength." "I need to—" Saraphina started. "You need to sit," Agatha said, in the tone of a woman who had been issuing this instruction for 31 years and had found that the universe, given time, always agreed with her. "The stairs aren't going anywhere. The guards aren't coming down here, and they don't know these passages exist. And whatever that mark on the pedestal is planning to do with you, it has waited this long." She gestured at the crate beside her. "Sit." Saraphina sat. For a moment, the only sound was the distant drip of water and the low, warm pulse of the mark in its circle of cleared dust. Then Agatha said, reaching into the pocket of her apron and producing, with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who planned for everything, a small, wrapped packet that smelled of ginger and something herbal. "Here, eat this. It'll help with the nausea. Also, I have questions." "You have questions," Saraphina repeated faintly. "Starting with—" Agatha settled herself back onto her crate and fixed Saraphina with a look that suggested she had been waiting to ask this for some time. "Are all 7 of them as loud as they feel from the outside? Because I could sense them from the 3rd-floor landing, and I have been thinking about what that means for sleep schedules in this castle for the next 6 months, and I would like to begin preparing emotionally. Despite everything, the guards overhead, the contractions, the mark that pulsed with her number, the man upstairs who had said make the arrangements in a voice she was going to hear for the rest of her life." Saraphina laughed. It came out broken and a little wild, the laugh of someone who had been terrified for so long that humor had become the only other option. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Her eyes stung. Agatha watched this with no particular alarm, in the manner of a woman who had seen most things and had a complete philosophical framework for all of them. "Good," Agatha said simply, when the laughing had passed. "You needed that." She unwrapped her own portion of ginger packet and bit into it with the pragmatic decisiveness of a woman who had accepted that the night was going to be long. "Now, tell me everything. Leave nothing out. And do try to get through it before the next contraction, because from what I can see—" She glanced at the mark, which had begun to pulse more strongly, in a rhythm that matched, unmistakably, the 7 heartbeats beneath Saraphina's hands. "That pedestal is about to become very interested in you, and I would like to understand what we are dealing with before it makes any decisions on our behalf." The mark flared gold. Saraphina felt the warmth spread from the floor through the soles of her feet, up through her legs, into her chest. And then deeper, reaching the 7 small lives within her, wrapping around each one like a greeting from something ancient that had been waiting for exactly them. Storm kicked, then all 7 did. And somewhere above them, through the stone and the sealed stairs and the cold dark of the wall that should not have opened, the sound of boots stopped. The sound of a different man's voice began, a voice she recognized, a voice she had spent 8 months trying to forget. The voice filtered through stone and sealed passages and 31 years of castle memory, and Agatha's jaw stopped mid-chew. She tilted her head the way a woman does when she has heard something that requires complete reallocation of cognitive resources. Then she looked at Saraphina, then at the ceiling. Then back at Saraphina with the expression of someone whose evening has taken a turn they find personally offensive. "That," Agatha said carefully, "is King Gaius." "Yes," Saraphina said. "He's been gone for 11 months. "Yes." "And you are—" Agatha gestured at Saraphina's belly with the soup ladle she had apparently been using as a hairpin and was now holding like a scepter. "Carrying his 7 pups, hidden in a secret room under his castle, while his cousin has been running the territory and also, apparently, planning to kill you. That is an accurate summary." Agatha chewed, swallowed, folded the ginger paper with precise meditative folds, the way a person folds things when their hands need something useful to do while their mind processes catastrophe. "Right," she said. "I'm going to need more tea for this." Above them, the castle had come alive. Saraphina could feel it through the stone, the shift in energy, the ripple of presence moving through the corridors like current through water. She had learned, in 8 months confined to the East Wing, to read Castle Varric by its sounds, the particular echo of boots on the great hall floor, the way voices carried differently through the south corridor versus the north, the creak of the main gates versus the servant entrance. What she felt now was none of those familiar things. This was something deeper. A vibration in the walls themselves, as though the castle recognized the man who had walked through its doors and was adjusting around him, settling, the way a wolf pack settles when the alpha returns. She felt it in her teeth. She felt it in that traitorous, inconvenient part of her chest that she had spent 8 months trying to wall off with practicality and fury. The mark on the pedestal pulsed once, sharp and bright, and then steadied into a slow, rhythmic glow. Storm kicked. "He's feeling it too," Saraphina murmured, her hand moving to her belly. "Which one is that?" "The one who kicks when something significant happens." Agatha considered this. "So he's been kicking constantly since you walked in here?" "Essentially, yes." "Smart pup," Agatha said with genuine approval. "I respect that in a wolf. Situational awareness from the womb. Very efficient." She pushed herself off the crate with her knees complaining loudly enough to echo, a sound that somehow made the ancient chamber feel slightly less ominous, and crossed to Saraphina with the no-nonsense efficiency of a woman who had been navigating crises for 6 decades and had a system. "Can you walk?" "I've been walking for 3 hours." "Can you walk without that expression on your face?" Saraphina looked at her. "The expression," Agatha clarified, patting her own face in the general area of the forehead. "That says I am in significant pain, but I refuse to admit it because admitting it would mean stopping, and stopping is not an option. That expression, it's very recognizable. I wore it myself for about 12 years of bad decisions in my 30s, thoughtfully. Some of them were worth it. Most were not." Another contraction moved through Saraphina, a real one this time, long and rolling, nothing like the warning flickers of earlier. She breathed through it with her eyes closed and both hands pressed flat to the curve of her belly, feeling 7 small presences shift and resettle within her like a tide adjusting to something incoming. When it passed, she opened her eyes. Agatha was watching with an expression that had set aside the dry humor entirely and replaced it with something quiet and competent and entirely reliable. The expression of a woman who knew exactly what was coming and was not afraid of it. "How many births have you attended?" Saraphina asked. 31 years in a castle kitchen, Agatha said, "which means I've attended 11, because apparently the East Wing corridors have some kind of magnetic effect on unexpected labor. Also 2 on the road, 1 in a barn during a blizzard, and once in a library which I refused to discuss because the circumstances were ridiculous, and the father fainted on a very valuable manuscript." She pulled Saraphina gently to her feet. "None with 7. But the principle is the same. They want to come out, and your job is to give them a safe place to do it." She glanced at the mark, still glowing. "Whatever that has to say about the matter." The mark had begun to do something new. While Saraphina steadied herself, and Agatha muttered a running inventory of supplies she did and did not have access to in a hidden underground room, the seven-pointed light on the pedestal had started to drift. Not randomly, purposefully, the way smoke moves when there is a specific wind. Each point of the circle was extending outward, slowly, like roots finding direction, spreading across the stone floor in thin threads of foxfire gold. Saraphina watched them move. They reached the curve of the circular room's wall and did not stop. They climbed. 7 threads of light, 7 directions, spreading upward through the stone in paths that had clearly been carved long before she arrived. Channels in the rock, invisible until the light found them, tracing patterns that she recognized in her bones even if her mind had no language for them yet. "It's a map," she said. Agatha peered at it. "Or a warning. Or both. In my experience," Agatha said, "things that glow in abandoned underground rooms are nearly always both." She squinted at the 7 threads of light with the expression of someone who has committed to a position and is now slightly regretting it. "Though I will admit this is more organized than I expected from a curse." "I don't think it's a curse." "You say that because you didn't spend 31 years listening to Lord Cassiel describe it as one." Agatha's voice shifted, very slightly, barely a degree, but Saraphina heard it. Something compressed and careful in the way the old woman said his name. He had records, texts from the old council. He was very thorough about explaining why 7 marked pups meant the end of the bloodline, the dissolution of the pack bond, the general collapse of Northern Territorial Order. He was also very thorough about explaining it specifically to King Gaius, 11 months ago, approximately 1 week before the king left on what was described as an urgent territorial inspection. The silence between them filled with implications. Saraphina turned to look at her. Agatha met her gaze steadily. "I'm not saying it. I'm just noting the timing." She picked up her soup ladle with an air of complete neutrality. "I've been noting the timing for 11 months, alone, in a kitchen, with no one to note it at." She pointed the ladle at Saraphina with mild emphasis. "You have no idea how relieving this conversation is." Overhead, footsteps changed direction. Both women looked up at the ceiling simultaneously, the automatic animal reflex of creatures accustomed to listening for danger above them. The footsteps were not the coordinated precision of the guard rotation. These were different, fewer, moving with authority rather than formation, moving directly. Saraphina felt the shift in her wolf a half-second before her mind caught up, that cellular, wordless recognition that her animal self processed faster than thought. A pull in her chest, like a compass needle dragged north. Like a wound that had been carefully numb for 8 months, suddenly remembering how to ache. "He's looking for something," she said quietly. "He's looking for you," Agatha said, with the pragmatic calm of someone who has already done the math. "Gaius Varek didn't come home at the 11th hour by accident. Kings don't make unannounced returns unless something told them to." She glanced at the mark, which was now pulsing in long, steady waves, the same rhythm as a heartbeat, if the heart in question was very large and very old and had been sleeping underground for a long time. "Something told him to." Storm kicked. Then, in a sequence so perfectly timed it felt deliberate, all 6 others followed, a rolling 7-part percussion against her ribs that made Saraphina catch her breath and almost smile. "They know," she said. "Of course they know," Agatha said, entirely without surprise. 7 marked pups in a hidden room under a castle that just woke up? They've probably known longer than we have. She straightened her apron, tucked the soup ladle back into her hair with practiced efficiency, and looked at Saraphina with the calm authority of someone issuing the most important logistical briefing of the evening. "Now, when he finds the entrance, and he will find it, they always find it. That's the thing about these old castles. They have opinions about who gets to know their secrets. You are going to let me do the talking first." Saraphina raised an eyebrow. "You're going to talk to the king. I'm going to establish certain parameters before his instincts override his manners. Yes." Agatha nodded with serene confidence. "I've been doing this since he was 7 years old and tried to steal bread rolls from my kitchen. The approach has not changed. It remains, speak first, be completely honest, do not let him get a word in until the important things have been said." She considered. "Also, if he sees you and tries to do something large and dramatic, I will step between you with the ladle. It's symbolic but surprisingly effective." The mark flared. The wall at the top of the stairs, the one that had no handle, no seam, no reason to open, opened. And in the rectangle of pale light above them, framed against the cold glow of the castle corridor, a figure stood at the top of the stairs and looked down into the dark. For one long, suspended moment, nobody moved. Then Agatha called upward, with the unruffled authority of a woman who had been head of an underkitchen for 3 decades and had issued instructions to wolves far more dangerous than kings. "Close the door behind you. There's a draft. And mind the 3rd step. It's uneven. I've been reporting it to maintenance for 6 years and they remain deeply unconcerned." A pause from the figure above. Then slowly, the door closed. Footsteps descended. Saraphina pressed her hand to her belly and felt 7 small lives hold very, very still. The focused stillness of creatures paying close attention to something that mattered. Storm did not kick. For the first time since she had found the stairs, he was completely, breathlessly quiet. Gaius Varick was not what she remembered. That was Seraphina's first thought, standing in the foxfire glow of the ancient chamber with one hand pressed to her belly and 11 months of silence pressing against her chest. He was not what she remembered, and what she remembered had already been enough to ruin her sleep for most of those 11 months. He was taller than the low staircase wanted him to be, and he descended with the careful, controlled movement of a wolf who had learned to fit himself into spaces that weren't built for him. Dark hair longer than before, jaw unshaved, traveling clothes worn at the seams. He had the look of a man who had been moving fast for a long time and had not stopped to consider whether he was ready for what he was moving toward. He stepped off the last stair, the uneven one, which caught his boot exactly as Agatha had predicted, and which he handled with a reflexive sideways step that suggested his dignity had developed excellent survival instincts. And into the light of the chamber. He saw Saraphina. Everything about him stopped, not gradually, not the slow dawning recognition of someone piecing together a scene. All at once, completely, like a man who had been braced against something and had the ground shift beneath him mid-brace. His eyes dropped to her belly, and the expression that crossed his face was not the one she had spent 11 months preparing for. It was not cold. It was not calculated. It was something she had no word for, something that lived in the space between devastation and relief. The expression of a man seeing evidence of something he had been afraid was a lie. The mark on the pedestal pulsed, once, deep, resonant, and then settled into a rhythm that matched nothing so much as 2 heartbeats finding the same tempo. Agatha stepped forward with the soup ladle held horizontally across her body in a gesture that was technically non-threatening and somehow entirely authoritative. "Before anything," she said, "happens, and I can see from your face that several things are trying to happen simultaneously. I need you to breathe. You look like you haven't eaten since the border. There's ginger in my left apron pocket. Take it." Gaius looked at the ladle, looked at Agatha. 30 years of kitchen authority radiated off the old woman like heat off stone. He took the ginger. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when too many important things need to be said, and none of them want to go first. Saraphina had rehearsed this conversation approximately 400 times during her confinement. She had arranged the words carefully, had decided on tone, controlled, clear, neither asking for anything nor apologizing for existing. She had planned exactly who she would be when she saw him again. She had not planned on being in an underground chamber with contractions 12 minutes apart. and an ancient glowing mark doing something architecturally significant to the walls behind her. "You came back," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. "Someone sent me a letter." His voice was lower than she remembered too, roughened at the edges. "No signature. Said there were 7 points on the Varex seal that had been dormant for 300 years. He looked at the mark, at the 7 threads of light still tracing their paths up the walls. And that I had approximately 11 months' worth of catching up to do. Saraphina felt the words land somewhere behind her sternum. Who sent it? I don't know. His gaze came back to her, stayed. It doesn't matter. It matters considerably, Agatha said, without looking up from the medicinal pack she was assembling from her apron pockets, with the focused efficiency of someone who had been quietly preparing for exactly this crisis while everyone else was having an emotional moment. Because the only person in this castle who knew about both the mark and the pregnancy was Lord Cassiel, and I have serious doubts about his philanthropic impulses. She produced a small cloth bundle and set it on the crate with a decisive pat. Someone else knew. I'd like to know who. Gaius turned to look at Agatha properly for the first time. Agatha, he said, with the weighted recognition of someone processing an unexpected detail. You're involved in this. I'm supervising this, she corrected pleasantly. There is a difference. One implies recklessness. The other implies that someone sensible is present. She pointed at the crate. Sit. Both of you. She's been on her feet for 3 hours and you've been on a horse for 2 days. This conversation will be significantly more productive if everyone is at the same elevation and nobody's knees give out. They sat. It was, Saraphina thought distantly, a deeply improbable tableau. A king in travel-worn clothes, a heavily pregnant she-wolf who had been fleeing for her life 4 hours ago, and a 65-year-old woman with a soup ladle in her hair, all sitting on upturned crates in an underground chamber while an ancient supernatural mark rearranged the architecture around them. Storm kicked. Then all 6 others followed, that rolling 7-part percussion she had come to know as their version of, "We're paying attention." Gaius went very still. His eyes dropped to her belly. His throat moved. 7, he said. It wasn't a question. 7, she confirmed. Something passed through his expression, something complicated and enormous that he was visibly in the process of deciding whether to feel in front of witnesses. Then he pressed it down with the practiced control of a man who had been making that particular decision for most of his adult life, and his jaw set, and his eyes came back to hers. Cassiel told me you'd lost them, he said. In the first month. He said there had been complications. That you'd recovered, but there was nothing. He stopped. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He was very thorough about it. Of course he was, Saraphina thought. She kept her voice level. He was thorough about a great many things. He told me that same story, Agatha said, from where she was now doing something with dried herbs that smelled of pine and something warm and medicinal. To every staff member who asked. Very practiced delivery, good eye contact, no hesitation. She blew a small piece of herb debris off her apron with the focused displeasure of someone who has been lied to consistently for 11 months and is cataloging it. I didn't believe him. Why not? Gaius asked. Because I could smell them from the 3rd-floor landing, Agatha said simply. 7 wolf pups in gestation have a very specific scent, like a thunderstorm building over a pine forest, if the thunderstorm had opinions and excellent timing. Also, she was visibly pregnant from month 4, and Cassiel kept telling people it was a medical condition related to the kidneys. I found that creative, but implausible. A sound escaped Gaius that was almost not a laugh. He pressed his hand to his mouth. Saraphina watched him. She had promised herself she would not do this, would not look for things in his face, would not try to read the terrain of him for signs of what he actually was, what he actually meant. She had spent 8 months building the wall between what she had felt and what she could afford to feel, and she was not going to dismantle it in an underground chamber because he looked tired and his voice cracked slightly when he said 7. Storm kicked directly at the wall she was building, with what felt like pointed commentary. "I felt that," she told him silently. Another contraction arrived, longer this time, with real intent behind it, and she breathed through it with her eyes closed and her hands flat against her belly, feeling Gaius's attention sharpen in the way of someone who has identified a situation and needs to immediately understand the timeline. "How close?" he asked. "Close enough," Agatha answered, before Saraphina could deflect. "Which is why we need to have the following conversation very efficiently." She set down the herbs, brushed off her hands, and fixed Gaius with the expression she had apparently been saving for this exact moment. The look of a woman who has been waiting 11 months to say something, and has no intention of being interrupted. Lord Cassiel said last night, through a wall he believed was solid, that the mother's role ends with the birth. See to the details. Your cousin, your regent, gave an order for her death. Tonight, while you were riding home. She let that settle. So, before we discuss marks and seals and 300 years of dormant supernatural architecture, I need to know one thing. Gaius's face had gone very still. "What did you know?" Agatha said, with the quiet, unassailable weight of a woman who dealt entirely in truth. "And when did you know it?" The mark pulsed. 7 threads of light climbed higher, and somewhere above them in the castle corridors, a door opened that should have been locked, and the sound of Lord Cassiel's footsteps began, deliberate and unhurried, moving toward the east wing. As though he already knew she was here, as though someone had told him. Storm went utterly silent, then kicked once, hard, like a warning. Gaius stood. Not dramatically. No swept cloaks, no clenched fists raised toward the ceiling. He simply rose from the crate with the quiet, complete certainty of a man who had just made a decision and was done deliberating. The shift was visible in the set of his shoulders, in the way the air around him changed, the way a wolf's posture changes the moment it stops calculating and starts moving. "What I knew," he said, and his voice had dropped to something careful and precise, "was what Cassiel told me. And what I should have done, 11 months ago before I left, was question it." His eyes held Saraphina's without flinching. "I didn't. That is mine to carry, but I am here now and Cassiel is not going to reach this room." "He doesn't know about the room," Saraphina said. "He knows about you," Agatha said, not looking up from her herbs, which at this particular moment amounts to the same thing. She tied off a small bundle with a precise knot. "The passage behind the East Linen Press connects to this corridor. Cassiel had it built during the 3rd year of his regency. He told the masons it was for ventilation." "It is not for ventilation." Both of them looked at her. "I pay attention," she said, with the serenity of someone who has been gathering information for 31 years, while everyone assumed the kitchen staff weren't listening. "It's the primary advantage of being considered furniture." Gaius moved to the stairs without hesitation. "I'll meet him at the corridor before he—" "You will not," Saraphina said. He turned. She had not meant to say it with quite that much force. But the force was there, and she didn't take it back, because 8 months of making every decision alone in a locked room had given her opinions about unilateral action, and she was not interested in swallowing them tonight. "If you go up there and confront him alone," she said, "he will spend the next 6 hours explaining to your council why the king returned erratic and aggressive from an 11-month absence and physically threatened his loyal regent without cause." She kept her voice even. "He's been building that narrative since you left. He's ready for you to walk into it." The silence had the quality of something shifting into place. "She's right," Agatha said, with the mild tone of someone confirming a weather observation. "He's been ready for you specifically. Visible anger, public confrontation. He needs that." She glanced up. "What he is not ready for is witnesses. credible ones, who have been here the entire time. The plan that assembled itself in the next 4 minutes was not elegant. It had the shape of something built from available materials rather than careful design, which was, Saraphina had learned, how the only reliable plans were made. Agatha knew the castle's secondary passages in the way that people know the rooms they have cleaned for 3 decades. Not architecturally, but physically, the way a body knows a familiar path in the dark. She knew which passages Cassiel used, which he had sealed, and, crucially, which one he did not know she knew about. "There is a guard," Agatha said, folding her herb bundle into her apron with an efficiency that suggested she had been waiting for an opportunity to say the next sentence for longer than tonight. "His name is Edric. He has been posted to the Lower East Wing for 6 years, which everyone in this castle considers a punishment assignment because nothing ever happens there." She did not quite look at anyone when she said this. "He is 63, has a knee that predicts rain, and brings me extra bread on Tuesdays because I told him once that I liked the seeded kind." A brief pause. "He knows about the East Passage. He has been watching it. He has not reported what he's seen to Cassiel, which in this castle, for the past 11 months, has been its own form of extraordinary courage." Saraphina watched Agatha's face during this speech. Something moved through the old woman's expression. Not softness exactly, but the territory adjacent to it, the kind that appears on faces that have decided softness is a vulnerability and are discovering, at 65, that they were perhaps mistaken about that. "He's the one who sent the letter," Gaius said quietly. Agatha's chin lifted by approximately 3 degrees. "I have no information about that." "Agatha." "I said what I said." She picked up the soup ladle and pointed it at the staircase. "He is at the top of the North Service stairs. He's been waiting since midnight, because he is a reliable man with good instincts, and no one has told him he is allowed to stop waiting." She turned to Gaius with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a woman who had decided to trust someone fully and was not going to dress it up. "Go get him. Don't use the main corridor. 3rd step is uneven on the way up, too." Gaius went. The chamber was quieter with only 2 of them in it, and the mark seemed to notice. Its pulsing slowed, deepened, the 7 threads of light on the walls holding steady at their current height, like an intake of breath suspended. Saraphina let herself feel briefly the weight of the last few hours. It pressed against her from all directions. The flight through the dark corridors, the wall that had opened under her hands, the sound of Cassiel's voice through the stone saying, "Make the arrangements in the same tone someone might use to discuss supply orders." The contractions steady now, arriving with the patient regularity of something that had its own timeline and was not interested in negotiating. And Gaius's face when he'd looked at her belly. That expression she had no word for. Storm kicked, gentle this time. Nothing like his usual emphatic percussion. Something that felt almost like I know. I felt it too. "You should eat something," Agatha said, lowering herself onto her crate with her knees registering their complaints audibly. She produced a second wrapped packet from her apron, this one smelling of honey and oats, and held it out. "How much do you have in those pockets?" Saraphina asked, taking it. "Enough," Agatha said. "I have worked in a castle kitchen for 31 years. I have never once been caught without provisions." She settled back with her own portion and chewed with the contemplative air of someone organizing their thoughts. "The mark," she said after a moment. "You touched the pedestal. Before I could stop you. When you came in." Saraphina glanced at the pedestal. The mark on its surface had changed slightly. The 7 points no longer identical, each one now glowing at a slightly different intensity, as though distinguishing itself from the others. "I didn't touch it. I was an inch away." "An inch was enough, I think." Agatha studied it. "I've been coming to this room for 9 years, since I found the staircase following a draft from the north kitchen wall." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but underneath it ran something that was not quite reverence and not quite fear. the tone of a person who has been sitting with an unanswerable question for a very long time. "It never did anything. Just sat there. I thought it was decorative." "Then you arrived in the castle 8 months ago, and 1 week later, it started glowing." The silence that followed had weight. "It knew," Saraphina said. "It was waiting," Agatha corrected. "There is a difference. Things that know are passive. Things that wait." She looked at the 7 threads of light climbing the walls, at the slow, breathing pulse of the pedestal. "Have a plan." Footsteps on the stairs above them. 2 sets this time, moving carefully, the second heavier and slightly uneven. The third step caught the second pair of boots, and a low, stoic grunt echoed down the stairwell. Knee, Saraphina thought. The knee that predicts rain. Agatha straightened. She did not look at the stairs immediately. She looked at the mark, at her hands, at the middle distance where people look when they are composing themselves. Then she looked up. The man who descended behind Gaius was broad and gray-haired, with a guard's posture worn soft at the edges by years and weather. He carried a lantern in one hand and held the wall with the other, navigating the uneven staircase with the careful pragmatism of a man who had learned not to trust his knee on uncertain terrain. He reached the bottom step and looked across the chamber. His eyes found Agatha. Something passed between them. Not dramatic, not announced. The quiet, enormous thing that passes between people who have been paying attention to each other from a careful distance for a very long time and have just run out of reasons to maintain the distance. "You waited," Agatha said. It came out slightly less dry than her usual register. "You told me to," Edric said simply. "I brought the seeded bread," he added, producing a cloth-wrapped bundle from his coat with the straightforward offering of a man who understood that some things were best said through practical gestures. Agatha looked at the bread for a moment. "Sit down," she said. "Mind your knee." Storm kicked, then all 6 others in their rolling 7-part sequence, but slower this time, warmer, like an acknowledgement rather than an alarm. Saraphina pressed her hand to her belly and felt, for the first time in 8 months, something that was not fear. Above them, in the East Wing corridor, a door opened. Cassiel had found the passage. The sound of Cassiel moving through the East Passage was different from any other sound in the castle. Saraphina had heard it before. That particular quality of silence that moved ahead of him like a herald. The way sound actually decreased around a man who had spent years training people not to make noise in his presence. She had learned it in her first week of confinement, when she'd realized that the absence of sound from the corridor was more warning than footsteps would have been. She heard it now, and her body responded before her mind did. Spine straight, chin up, both hands steady against her belly. The posture of a woman who had decided, somewhere in the last 3 hours, that she was done arranging herself around other people's comfort. Gaius heard it too. He positioned himself at the foot of the stairs without being asked, which was the right instinct for the wrong reason, and Saraphina said, quietly, without heat, "Stand beside me, not in front." He looked at her. "I mean it," she said. "He needs to see me first. If he sees you first, he performs for you. If he sees me first, he makes a mistake." Edric, from his crate beside Agatha, made the small sound of a man who has just revised his assessment of someone upward. Agatha said nothing. She handed Saraphina the soup ladle. Saraphina looked at it. "Symbolic," Agatha said, "but effective." Cassiel came through the wall panel in the northwest curve of the chamber, a section of stone that Saraphina had not identified as a door, which meant he had moved through it with the ease of someone who had used it many times. He carried no light. He needed none, which meant he had been in this room before, in the dark, enough times to navigate it by memory. He was exactly as she remembered. Tall, composed, with the kind of face that arranged itself into expressions rather than wearing them. Everything chosen, nothing accidental. His eyes moved across the chamber in a single sweep and catalogued everything. The mark pulsing on the pedestal, the threads of light on the walls, Edric in the corner, Agatha beside him, Gaius, standing beside Saraphina. Something flickered in Cassiel's expression. Gone in under a second, but real. The specific micro-expression of a man whose plan has encountered a variable he did not account for. "Cousin," he said. Smooth, warm, almost. "You move quickly. I wasn't expecting you until dawn." "Evidently," Gaius said. The single word landed with considerable weight. Cassiel's gaze moved to Saraphina, and the warmth in his expression became something else. Not hostile, which would have been easier, but careful. The expression of someone recalibrating in real time. "You found her?" "Good. I've been looking. The guards reported she left her rooms and I was concerned." "Don't," Saraphina said. Not loudly. She didn't need loud. 8 months in a locked room with nothing but time, and her own clarity had taught her that the most effective thing a voice could do was arrive without apology and stop performing. Cassiel stopped. "Last night," she said, "through the wall of my room, you told someone to make arrangements for after the birth." She kept her eyes on his face and watched him decide, in real time, which version of this conversation he was going to attempt. "I heard the exact words. I know the voice you were speaking to. It was Commander Veth, who has been your man since before Gaius left. I know the plan, and I know how long you've been building it." She tilted her head slightly. "I also know you've been in this room. You know what the mark is. You knew what 7 pups meant for the Varek bloodline, and you told Gaius they were gone because a living heir, 7 living heirs, makes your regency permanent and impossible." The chamber was very quiet. The mark pulsed. Once, deliberate. Cassiel looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes that was more complex than the expression of a simple villain, which was the thing about him that had always made him genuinely dangerous. He was not simple. He had looked at the mark and seen a threat, not because he was cruel, but because he was afraid, and had spent years converting that fear into action before anyone could see the fear underneath. "You don't understand what 7 means," he said, and his voice had shifted, the performance stripped back, something more raw beneath it. "It's not about the regency. It was never about—" He stopped, pressed his jaw together, started again. "The last 7-marked litter in the Varek line was 3 centuries ago. Do you know what happened to that pack?" "I know what you were told happened," Saraphina said. "I've been reading the same records from the castle library for 8 months. I also read the original source text, not the council summary. The 7-marked litter didn't destroy the pack. The council's response to it did. They panicked. They acted. And what they lost was irreplaceable." Silence. Agatha, in the corner, made the sound of someone who has been sitting on information and is experiencing relief at its release. "I found that text 4 years ago," Agatha said, addressing the room with the serene inevitability of someone whose moment has arrived. "In a box in the sub-kitchen that someone had incorrectly catalogued as a record of winter food stores." She folded her hands. "I am not a scholar, but I am literate, and I have good judgment about things that matter." She looked at Cassiel directly. "You read the summary. I read the source. There is a difference." Cassiel's composure had developed a fracture line, not collapsed, but visible, the way stone looks just before it shifts. He looked at Gaius with the expression of a man making a last appeal to a shared history. "You know me. 11 months I held this territory together. Everything I did was for the territory," Gaius said quietly. "I believe that. I also believe that somewhere between protecting the pack and protecting your position, you stopped being able to tell those 2 things apart." He held his cousin's gaze without anger, which was somehow more final than anger would have been. "That is not something I can set aside." The mark chose this moment to do something new. It had been building, the 7 threads of light on the walls climbing incrementally higher with each exchange, each truth spoken in the chamber, as though the ancient thing in the pedestal was monitoring the conversation and measuring it against some criterion of its own. Now, all 7 threads reached the ceiling simultaneously and connected. 7 lines of foxfire gold meeting at a single point directly above the pedestal, forming a shape overhead that had no name in any language Saraphina knew, but which her wolf recognized with an immediacy that bypassed thought entirely. A complete circuit, a seal, activated. All 7 pups moved at once. Not their usual rolling percussion, but something unified, a single sustained pressure that was less kick and more presence, as though each of them had turned toward the light above and simply said, "Here." Cassiel looked up at the ceiling, and for the first time since he had entered the room, the careful architecture of his expression came completely apart. Not into rage, not into denial, into something much simpler and much harder to manage. He was afraid he was wrong. "What is it doing?" he asked, and the voice was stripped of everything except the question. "Recognizing them," Saraphina said. "The seal has 7 points," Edric said from his corner, with the quiet authority of a man who has been holding information carefully for a very long time and has decided now is the right moment. "It's been in the old guard records since the founding. We were told it would activate when the 7-marked line returned." He looked at Cassiel steadily. "Not as a warning, as a confirmation." A contraction arrived, the longest yet, undeniable, with the particular quality of something that was no longer preliminary. Saraphina breathed through it, eyes open, spine straight. When it passed, she looked at Cassiel, who was still staring at the seal burning gold above them. "Whatever you decide to do next," she said, "you should know that I'm not asking for anything from you. Not forgiveness, not alliance, not even acknowledgement." She kept her voice even. "But those 7 lives are not a threat. They never were. And no one in this room, or this castle, is going to treat them as one again." Storm kicked, once, firm, final, like a verdict. Agatha stood, tucked the ladle back into her hair, and began moving with the efficient calm of a woman who has identified the exact moment when talking ends and practical action begins. "Right," she said. "The seal can witness everything it likes. But we are going to need more than ginger and seeded bread for what comes next." She looked at Edric. "How fast can you reach the upper kitchen without being seen?" Edric stood, knee protesting. "Fast enough." "Good." She listed supplies with the rapid precision of a professional. "Go." He went. At the top of the stairs, his boot caught the 3rd step. The stoic grunt echoed down exactly as before. Agatha closed her eyes briefly with the expression of a woman adding 3rd step permanently to a list of things she would handle personally going forward. The seal burned above them, gold and complete and very old, lighting the chamber like the beginning of something. Outside, dawn was approximately 2 hours away. Cassiel left before dawn. Not expelled, not escorted, not dramatic. He simply looked at the seal burning above the pedestal for a long moment, then looked at Gaius with the expression of a man setting down something very heavy that he had been carrying for a very long time, and said he would be in his chambers when the council convened. Then he walked back through the wall panel he had come from, his footsteps fading into the passage until the stone swallowed them entirely. The chamber exhaled. Agatha watched the panel close and said nothing, which from a woman who had commentary for everything meant she was thinking hard. Edric had returned from the kitchen with provisions enough to sustain a small siege: bread, dried fruit, 2 flasks of hot water wrapped in cloth, and a jar of something amber and herbal that he placed in Agatha's hands without explanation, and she accepted without asking, which spoke to a level of existing understanding that had clearly been developing quietly for 6 years of Tuesday bread deliveries. Gaius stood near the pedestal, not touching it, his back to Saraphina in the particular way that meant he was aware of exactly where she was. She knew that particular way. She had catalogued it without meaning to in the weeks before he left. The way he occupied a room differently when she was in it. the way his attention moved even when his eyes didn't. She had decided, at the time, not to think too carefully about what it meant. She had been very disciplined about that. Storm kicked. "You were," she told him silently. "Don't editorialize." "You should sit," Gaia said, without turning. "You said that already. You were standing when I said it before. I'm aware." She stayed standing, because sitting felt like conceding something she hadn't decided to concede yet. Another contraction moved through her, steadier now, more deliberate, the kind that had stopped being a suggestion and become a schedule. She breathed through it without making a sound, which she was aware he could tell anyway from the shift in her breathing, because wolves always could. He turned. The distance between them was 8 feet and 11 months, and a silence that had been building weight the entire time, and neither of them filled it immediately because some silences need to reach their full size before they can be moved through. "I should have asked more questions before I left," he said. Not an excuse dressed as an apology, just a fact stated plainly, the way he had spoken in the chamber earlier. Cassiel was thorough, and I wanted to believe the territory was in good hands. That wanting made me careless with the questions I should have been asking. Saraphina looked at him steadily. "He told you I'd lost the pups." "Yes." "And you believed him." "I had no reason not to. At the time." He held her gaze without flinching from what was in it. "That's not a defense. I'm not offering it as one." "Good," she said, "because it isn't one." Something in his jaw shifted. Not offense, recognition. The expression of a man who has decided that being told true things is more valuable than being managed, and is encountering evidence that this decision is correct. Agatha, from the corner where she was doing something useful with the provisions and pretending not to listen, made a small sound of approval that she immediately disguised as clearing her throat. "Tell me about them," Gaia said. The shift in his voice was subtle, but complete, from the careful register of accountability into something else, something that lived underneath the king and the 11 months, and the weight of everything that had been done and not done. Something that was simply a father asking. Saraphina felt the wall she had been maintaining shift on its foundations. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling them, all 7 present, all 7 distinct in the way she had learned to distinguish them over months of quiet attention. "Storm kicks when something significant happens," she said. "He's the one I felt first. He has strong opinions and a very low threshold for what counts as significant. The 2 on the left tend to move together. I call them the twins in my head, though I don't know yet if that's accurate. They have a rhythm, like they're always in conversation." She let herself keep going because it turned out she had been saving this for someone and hadn't known it. "There's a quiet one. I think she, though I'm guessing, settles everyone else down when they get loud. She moves last, but everyone follows her." Her throat tightened slightly. "And the smallest, the one I worry about most. She barely moves, but when she does, it's always deliberate, always exactly once. Like she's conserving everything for when it matters." The chamber was very quiet. Gaius hadn't moved. His eyes hadn't left her face, with the complete, still attention of a person who understands that they are being given something valuable and is not going to drop it. "You've been talking to them," he said. "For 8 months. Alone." She lifted her chin slightly. It seemed important that they knew someone was there. A breath moved through him. Slow, deep, the kind that carries weight. "They always knew," he said quietly. "You were always there." The wall shifted again, more significantly this time, the kind of shift that announces structural compromise. Saraphina looked away from him, at the threads of light on the walls, at the seal still burning gold overhead. "I'm not," she started, then stopped, because what she was trying to say required more precision than she currently had access to. "I need you to understand that I'm not the same person who was in this castle 8 months ago. That person waited for things, expected things. believed that proximity to someone who chose her meant she was safe. She looked back at him. I don't wait anymore, and I don't assume safety. Whatever happens after tonight, I need you to understand that those are not temporary conditions. He held her gaze. I understand. I don't think you do yet, she said without cruelty. But I think you will. A contraction arrived, the longest yet, with real authority behind it, and this one pulled a short, sharp breath from her before she could contain it. Agatha was beside her before the breath finished, one hand on her back, the other pressing the herbal flask into her grip with the calm efficiency of someone for whom this was not an emergency, but a transition. Sit, Agatha said. This time I'm not asking. Saraphina sat. Edric appeared at her elbow with the quiet materialization of a man who had spent years learning to be useful without being noticed, holding a folded blanket with the same straightforward offering as the seated bread. He looked at Agatha. The upper passage is clear. Veth's men have pulled back to the west wing. Seems like Cassiel sent word. Agatha received this information with a single nod and the focused expression of someone updating a plan in real time. Good. We have time. She looked at Edric with something she was clearly trying to keep practical. You should eat something. You've been standing in a cold corridor since midnight. I'm fine. You're 63 with a prophetic knee, and you've been standing on stone for 6 hours. Eat something. She held out a portion of bread with the decisive gesture of a woman who has repackaged care as instruction, and finds this entirely reasonable. Edric looked at the bread, looked at Agatha, took it. You're very bossy, he observed without apparent objection. I prefer organized, she said. There's a distinction. Is there? One implies chaos management. The other implies that I simply know better than most people what needs to happen next. In this case, both apply. Gaius, watching this from across the chamber, pressed his mouth together in a line that was doing significant work containing something. Saraphina caught his eye. For a moment, just one, something moved between them that was not the weight of 11 months or the complexity of everything unresolved. Something smaller and warmer and entirely involuntary. The shared recognition of two people watching something quietly extraordinary happen in the corner of a room. Then the moment passed and the weight came back, but it sat differently on her chest than it had before. Lighter by a fraction. Just a fraction. Storm kicked. Soft, once, the way he moved when things were settling rather than building. I know, she told him. Outside the castle walls, the sky had begun its slow shift toward the particular gray-blue that comes before dawn. Not light yet, not dark anymore. Something between. The pups arrived with the dawn. Not all at once. Nothing about 7 was ever all at once. It happened the way the seal had activated, the way the light had climbed the walls, the way every significant thing in this chamber seemed to happen. Incrementally, each piece arriving with its own particular weight and timing, as if the universe had strong opinions about sequence. Agatha had apparently been preparing for this moment for 31 years. She issued instructions with the brisk authority of a general who has studied the terrain and identified all available resources, which in this case were Edric, who proved surprisingly unflappable and followed directions with the quiet competence of a man who had been useful in difficult situations before. Gaius, who was given a specific and practical role that kept his hands occupied and his instincts from doing anything large and decisive at the wrong moment. And Saraphina herself, who was told exactly 3 things. Breathe, trust your body, and if you feel the need to make the noise. We are underground and no one can hear you. Saraphina made noise twice. The second time, Edric very gently excused himself to the base of the stairs, which Agatha permitted with a look that said she found this medically unnecessary, but humanly understandable. Storm came first. Of course he did. He arrived into the world with the emphatic energy of a pup, who had been waiting impatiently for 8 months, and had opinions about the delay, and the sound he made was so immediate and so indignant that Agatha actually laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine, the kind that escapes before the dry exterior can catch it. "Opinionated," she said with unmistakable approval. "Exactly as advertised." Saraphina reached for him with hands that were shaking slightly, not from weakness, from the specific overwhelm of a moment that no amount of 8 months' preparation fully prepares you for. The moment of real. The moment when something you have been protecting in the dark becomes something you can hold. He was small and gray-dark and furious about the temperature, and he pressed his nose against her palm and made a sound that was several degrees less indignant than the first one. "Hello," she said. Her voice came out very quiet. "I know, it's colder out here. I'm sorry about that." Storm made a sound that clearly communicated his position on the matter, while simultaneously burrowing closer. Gaius, kneeling beside her, looked at the small furious pup in her hands with an expression that had abandoned all its careful architecture entirely. There was nothing measured about it. It was simply a man looking at something that had just made the abstract completely, irreversibly real. He reached out one hand, slowly, giving her the choice. She shifted Storm gently into the space between both their hands. Storm sniffed Gaius's thumb with the suspicious thoroughness of someone conducting an audit, then sneezed, then settled. "He approves," Agatha said, attending to the next with focused efficiency. Which is fortunate, because disapproval from that one seems like it would be very sustained. The twins came together, as Saraphina had always suspected they would, as she had always felt them moving together, in conversation. They arrived within minutes of each other and immediately oriented toward each other with the instinctive accuracy of two creatures who had spent months as each other's primary reference point and had no intention of changing that arrangement. The quiet one, the one Saraphina had felt settling the others, the one she had called the peacekeeper in her mind during long solitary nights, came forth. She arrived with a composure that was remarkable for a newborn, looked at the assembled humans in the chamber with dark, calm eyes, and made one single sound. One. Deliberate, exactly as Saraphina had predicted. "That one," Edric said from the stairs, having materialized back into the chamber at some point during the third arrival, "is going to be the most dangerous of the 7. "She's going to run things," Agatha agreed, not looking up. "You can tell from the first breath. Some of them come in loud, some come in quiet. The quiet ones who look at everything first, those are the ones who end up in charge." "I was a quiet one." "I know," Edric said. A brief pause. "You were loud," Agatha said. "I was confident," he corrected. "As I said. 5. 6. The smallest last, arriving so gently that for one suspended moment Saraphina's heart stopped completely, that cold fear she had been carrying for months rising into her throat. And then the smallest one made her sound. Once. Deliberate. Unhurried. "I told you," the small movement seemed to say. "I was always going to arrive. I was just conserving everything for when it mattered." The breath that came out of Saraphina then was not the controlled, disciplined exhale of the last 8 months. It was everything at once, relief and exhaustion and the particular grief of fear finally releasing, the kind of cry that is not sadness, but the body's way of setting down weight it has been carrying so long it forgot what it felt like without it. Gaius's hand found hers. She did not move it away. By the time the dawn light reached the castle properly, all 7 were present, accounted for, and warm, arranged in a careful configuration that Agatha had organized with the same competence she applied to everything, and which Storm had immediately begun reorganizing according to his own priorities. 7 pups, 7 points on the seal above them, glowing steadily gold. Agatha sat on her crate with her hands in her lap and looked at them with an expression she was not trying to manage into anything. After a moment, she reached up, removed the soup ladle from her hair, and set it down beside her with the air of someone formally concluding a chapter. "Well, that was 31 years of working in this castle entirely justified," Edric, seated beside her closer than strictly necessary, said nothing. He simply reached over and put his hand over hers in the straightforward way of a man who had decided the time for indirection was finished. Agatha looked at his hand, looked at him. "You have terrible timing," she said. "I've been waiting 6 years for a good moment," he said reasonably. "There wasn't one, so I stopped waiting." "That's almost wisdom," she said. "I learned from watching someone else do it badly for 11 months, he said, with the mild nod of a man crediting his sources. Agatha made the sound of someone who finds something genuinely, involuntarily funny, and is not entirely pleased about it. Then she turned her hand over beneath his and did not move it away. Saraphina, watching from across the chamber with 7 sleeping pups arranged against her, and Gaius's shoulder warm against hers in the cold air, felt something settle in her chest that she recognized from the chamber walls, the particular feeling of a circuit completing, of something ancient and patient finally finding its answer. Storm shifted in his sleep, made one small sound of contentment, and was still. Outside, through stone and passage and castle walls, the dawn was fully arrived. The territory was awake. And in an underground chamber that had been waiting 300 years for exactly this. 7 points burned gold above 7 sleeping pups, and 2 people who had not yet said all the things that needed saying, but had the rest of their lives to say them. That, for now, was enough. The council chamber smelled of old wood and burning tallow, and the particular tension of 12 wolves who had been summoned before breakfast and had not been told why. Saraphina heard them through the wall before she entered, the low murmur of voices, the scrape of chairs, someone coughing with the repeated persistence of a person who wanted the room to know they were present and inconvenienced. She recognized 2 voices from her months of listening through stone. Elder Voss, who had opinions about everything and delivered them in the tone of someone reading scripture. Elder Marin, quieter, more dangerous, the one who asked the questions that mattered. She had spent 30 minutes in Agatha's care before this, washed, redressed in the first clean clothes she had worn in 2 days, hair arranged with the ruthless efficiency of a woman who understood that appearance in a council chamber was not vanity, but strategy. Agatha had worked in silence for most of it, which from her was the equivalent of a formal declaration of support. "You look like someone who has already won," Agatha said, stepping back to assess her work. "I look like someone who hasn't slept." "Those are not mutually exclusive." She straightened Seraphina's collar with a decisive pat. "The pups are with Edric. He has the instructions. He will not deviate from them. He may deviate slightly from the feeding schedule because Storm has already identified him as susceptible to pressure, but structurally he will not deviate." Despite everything, Seraphina almost smiled. She entered the council chamber ahead of Gaius. His idea, reconsidered and accepted, because she had been right in the underground chamber, and they both knew it. Cassiel was already present, seated to the right of the head chair with the composed patience of a man who had decided on his narrative and was waiting for his moment to deliver it. His eyes moved to her when the door opened, and the calculation in them was immediate and visible. She watched him recalculate. She was not the Saraphina who had been confined to the East Wing. She was not frightened, not diminished, not arranging herself to take up less space. She crossed the chamber to the center position, not the petitioner's spot near the door, the center, the place where someone stands when they are not asking for a verdict, but delivering one. And she stood there and let the council look at her. 12 pairs of eyes, some hostile, some uncertain, some carefully neutral in the way of people who have learned that neutrality is its own position. Elder Voss opened his mouth. "I'll speak first," Seraphina said, not loudly, just clearly in the register of someone who has decided the sequence. Then Lord Cassiel, then the king. She let the slight emphasis on "then" carry its own implication. "Then you'll have everything you need to make a decision." A beat of silence. Elder Marin, in her chair at the far end, said nothing. but her eyes had sharpened with the particular attention of someone who has just revised their assessment upward. Saraphina spoke for 11 minutes. She did not perform grief. She did not appeal to sympathy or frame herself as a victim, because victims are managed and she was not here to be managed. She presented what had happened with the same precision she had used in the underground chamber. Dates, conversations overheard through walls, the 11-month sequence of Cassiel's actions laid out in order, each piece connected to the next by logic and evidence rather than emotion. She ended with the seal. The Varric founding records describe 7-pointed activation as confirmation of bloodline continuity, she said. Not threat, not curse, confirmation. She held Elder Marin's gaze for the last part, because Elder Marin was the one who had read the founding records and she knew it. The seal activated last night, 12 hours after the 7 marked pups were born, in the chamber beneath the east wing that your founding alpha built specifically for this purpose. You can visit it today. The seal is still active. It will be active for the rest of their lives. She stepped back. Gaius entered. Cassiel spoke for 9 minutes. He was good. She had known he would be. Careful, measured, acknowledging certain facts while recontextualizing others, threading the needle between admission and defense with the skill of a man who had been preparing this version of events since the moment he heard Gaius's horse at the castle gate. He did not lie outright. He was too intelligent for that. He simply arranged the truth into a different shape. When he finished, Elder Voss looked satisfied in the way of someone whose existing position had been confirmed. 3 other council members wore variations of the same expression, not convinced exactly, but willing to be. Elder Marin looked at Cassiel for a long moment. Then she looked at Saraphina. "The seal," she said. "You said it's still active." "Yes. I'd like to see it." "Of course." Saraphina met her gaze steadily. "I'd also like you to meet them when you're ready. All 7. They are—" She chose the word deliberately. "Remarkable." Something moved through Elder Marin's expression, professional neutrality engaging with something more human underneath. Then Gaius spoke. He did not speak long. He had never been a man who used more words than the situation required. It was one of the things she had catalogued without meaning to in the weeks before his departure. He stated what he knew, what he had failed to question, and what his position was now without framing the acknowledgement of failure as weakness. Then he said one more thing. "Saraphina of Nopak," he said, using the designation that had been her legal status since birth. No great family, no claimed territory, the technical absence that people like Cassiel had used to minimize her standing for 8 months. Protected 7 Varric heirs alone for 11 months under conditions that should have been impossible. She did this without resources, without allies, and without certainty that anyone was coming. The question of her status in this territory is not open for council deliberation. She is Luna of the Varric pack. She has been since the moment my wolf recognized hers, which happened well before either of us was ready for it. I am informing you of that fact, not requesting a vote on it. Silence. Elder Voss looked like he had swallowed something difficult. Elder Marin looked like a woman making a very specific note in a very specific mental ledger. Cassiel looked at his hands on the council table, and then he did something that Saraphina had not prepared for, had not included in any of the 400 versions of this conversation she had rehearsed in her East Wing room. He looked up. Not at Gaius. At her. "I was wrong," he said, with the stripped-back plainness of someone who has set down the last piece of the performance. "About what 7 meant. About what you were." A breath. "I was afraid, and I converted that fear into action before I let myself question whether the fear was justified." He held her gaze. "That's not absolution. I know that. I'm not offering it as one." The echo of Gaius's earlier words, "That's not a defense, I'm not offering it as one," moved through the chamber like a stone dropped in still water. Saraphina looked at Cassiel for a long moment. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." She let the silence hold for exactly the right amount of time. "But it's a beginning." The council voted in 40 minutes, not unanimously. Elder Voss registered his objection with the formal language of a man who intends his objection to be recorded for posterity, which Saraphina respected as at least being honest about its position. 2 others abstained. The remaining 9 voted to recognize the 7 pups as legitimate Varric heirs, to lift all East Wing confinement orders, and to formally record Seraphina's status as Luna. Elder Marin cast the deciding vote without hesitation, set down her marker, and looked at Saraphina across the chamber with the expression of a woman who has watched things unfold exactly as they should and finds this deeply satisfying. "I'd like to meet them," she said. "The pups, when they're ready for visitors." "Tomorrow morning," Saraphina said. "Come early. Storm is more manageable before he's fully awake." Elder Marin blinked. Then, to what appeared to be the council's collective astonishment, she laughed. 3 days after the council vote, Storm figured out how to climb. Not stairs. Stairs were for later, when Paws had fully committed to the concept of coordination. What Storm figured out, with the focused determination of a pup who had been waiting his entire short life for the opportunity, was how to scale the side of the wooden crate that Agatha had designated as the official sleeping arrangement. He did it at approximately the 4th hour of the morning, while everyone in the chamber was asleep, and the thud of his arrival on the wrong side of the crate woke Edric, who woke Agatha, who appeared over the edge of her own cot with her silver hair entirely unmoored from its arrangement and her expression conveying volumes about the hour. Storm looked up at her from the floor, made a sound that was clearly, "I meant to do that." "You," Agatha said, "are going to be exhausting." Storm wagged his tail with tremendous enthusiasm, which was both an agreement and an endorsement of the arrangement. Edric from his cot said, "He gets that from his father's side. You've known the father for 3 days." "Long enough." Agatha looked at Storm, at the crate, at the ceiling, and back at Storm. "Back in," she said, reaching down to scoop him up with the resigned expertise of a woman who had already accepted her fate. "You can scale things when your paws work properly. That won't be for weeks. In the meantime, we sleep." Storm burrowed against her with the immediate contentment of a pup who had achieved his actual goal, which had never been the other side of the crate and had always been exactly this. Agatha looked down at him, looked at Edric. "I was not planning on this," she said. "Which part?" "Any of it." She settled back with Storm tucked against her side, and her voice had lost its dry edge entirely, replaced by something quieter. "The room, the pups. She gestured vaguely in his direction with the hand that wasn't occupied with Storm. "The company," Edric offered. "I was going to say the general disruption to my established routines." "Were you?" "But yes," she said, "also the company." Edric smiled. The unhurried smile of a man who has been patient for 6 years and is finding the patience entirely vindicated. "Go to sleep, Agatha." She looked at Storm once more, at the 6 other small forms arranged in their sleeping pile with the twins pressed together and the quiet one at the center, and the smallest tucked against the largest in the arrangement they had established on the first night and refused to deviate from since. "Fine," she said. "But tomorrow we are addressing the sleeping arrangements properly. 7 growing wolf pups in a converted crate is a temporary solution, and I will not be managing a temporary solution indefinitely." "Tomorrow," Edric agreed. Storm made a sound of sleepy contentment. Agatha closed her eyes with the expression of someone who has lost an argument they didn't particularly want to win. Saraphina found them like that in the morning, Agatha upright and precise by the time anyone else was awake, Storm in her lap with the proprietary confidence of a pup who has claimed a territory and intends to defend it. Edric at the small table Gaius had arranged to be brought down 2 days ago, doing something careful and competent with the feeding schedule that Agatha had designed, and he had clearly been studying with the dedication of a man who takes his responsibilities seriously. The underground chamber had changed in 3 days. Gaius had sent for things without being asked. Blankets, proper lighting, a larger sleeping arrangement for the pups that Storm had immediately begun testing for structural weaknesses. Edric had brought the seeded bread every morning without comment, which Agatha received with the manner of someone who has accepted a tribute and finds it adequate. The foxfire in the walls had softened into a steady, warm glow that never quite went out, as if the seal above them was content now and expressing that contentment as ambient light. It still did not feel permanent. That was what Saraphina was working through, in the quiet hours when the pups slept, and Agatha and Edric were occupied with each other in the careful, circling way of people discovering late in life that they have found something they didn't know they were missing. The distinction between safe for now and safe going forward. Between the council's vote, which was a legal fact, and the actual, lived reality of what it meant to be Luna of a territory where half the council had needed to be convinced she deserved to exist. She was sitting against the wall near the pedestal, close enough to feel its warmth, which she had discovered 3 days ago had a quality like company, when Gaius came down the stairs. He navigated the 3rd step without incident, which she noted and suspected Agatha would consider an improvement. He sat beside her on the floor without preamble, which was something she was learning was characteristic of him. The absence of theater in small moments, the way he occupied space without performing it. Cassiel requested a formal meeting, he said. Today. I know. Elder Marin had told her yesterday morning, during her first visit to meet the pups. A visit that had lasted twice as long as scheduled and ended with Elder Marin holding the quiet one with an expression of total capitulation that she would have denied if described to her. I think he should have it. Gaius looked at her. You don't have to be part of it. I know I don't have to. She kept her eyes on the seal above them, the 7 points steady in gold. I want to be, not because I need to watch him answer for what he did. I don't need that. But because the conversation that needs to happen between you two cannot happen properly if I'm the thing neither of you is saying. I'm not a wound in your relationship with him. I'm not a complication. I am the Luna of this territory and the mother of 7 Varek heirs. And if that conversation happens without me in the room, it happens with me as an absence instead of a presence. She turned to look at him. I'm done being an absence in rooms. He held her gaze for a long moment. All right, he said. She turned back to the seal. There's something else, he said. She waited. I want to move everyone upstairs today. His voice had the careful quality of someone offering something rather than announcing it. There are chambers on the north side, large, connected, with windows that face east for the morning light. They've been empty since my mother used them. They're the right size, for 7. He let that sit for a moment. And for everyone who seems to have become permanently attached to 7. Saraphina thought about Agatha on her crate, Edric and his knee and his seeded bread and his 6 years of patient waiting, the seal above them, which had done its work and was now simply present, content, and steady. Agatha will have opinions about the kitchen access, she said. Agatha can have the kitchen. She already thinks she has the kitchen. Then the transition will be seamless. From across the chamber, Storm, who had been asleep and was apparently not asleep, made a sound that was entirely too alert for a pup who had been snoring 30 seconds ago. The twins stirred. The quiet one opened her eyes and looked at Saraphina across the chamber with that particular dark, calm gaze. One sound, deliberate. It's time. Saraphina pressed her hand to the warm stone of the pedestal beside her. Not the mark, just the stone. Feeling its age and steadiness and the particular quality of a thing that has been patient long enough. Then she looked at Gaius. Upstairs, she said. Yes. He stood, extended his hand. She looked at it for one moment, feeling the weight of everything that was still unresolved, all the words not yet said, the distance 11 months had built that would take real time to cross. She was not naive about that. She was not pretending it was simple. But she was also not, any longer, someone who refused the next step because the full journey was unclear. She took his hand. Behind them, Agatha, who had definitely been listening the entire time, said to Edric, at a volume calibrated to carry, "Finally." Edric said, "You could have just said something earlier and saved everyone months." "I prefer," Agatha said, "to let things develop at their natural pace. You were coaching Storm to kick on purpose." "I was doing nothing of the sort." Storm, from his position in her lap, wagged his tail with comprehensive enthusiasm. Agatha looked down at him. "We are going to have a conversation about discretion," she said firmly. Storm wagged harder. 1 year later, Storm learned to howl. Not the experimental, structurally uncertain sound he had been producing for months, the one that began as a howl, lost confidence halfway through, and arrived as something between a question and a complaint. This was real. This was the sound that came from the chest, rather than the throat. The sound that traveled. The sound that the territory heard and answered. He did it at dawn, standing on the north window ledge of the chambers that had become home, and every wolf in Castle Varek stopped what they were doing and listened. Then 6 others joined him. 7 voices, 7 distinct registers, Storm's emphatic and declarative, the twins in their perpetual conversation weaving around each other, the quiet one's single sustained note that somehow made every other voice settle into place around it, the smallest thread of sound so precise it cut through everything else and held. Saraphina stood in the doorway and let it move through her completely. She did not try to contain what she felt. She had stopped doing that 11 months ago in an underground chamber, when she had understood that the wall between her and the world had not been protecting her. It had been protecting the world from knowing how much she had to give. The howl carried out over the territory, and the territory answered. Distant voices from the village, from the east fields, from the border guard posts where Edric's replacement had settled in with the solid competence of someone Edric had personally trained and thoroughly interrogated before approving. 7 voices and the territory's response folding together into something that was not a beginning and not an ending, but the deep, resonant sound of something established. Gaius appeared beside her in the doorway. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He simply stood with his shoulder against hers and listened to their 7 pups announce themselves to the world, and the expression on his face was the one she had been watching develop for a year, the one that had started cracked open and uncertain in an underground chamber, and had become, with time and honesty and the daily work of choosing each other properly, something whole. Storm finished his howl, looked back over his shoulder at both of them, and sneezed with magnificent timing. "Perfect," Gaius said quietly. "Every time," Saraphina agreed. The council had changed. Not all at once. Elder Voss had maintained his formal objections for 3 months before the weight of evidence, which arrived daily in the form of 7 thriving, extraordinary pups and a territory that had not collapsed into any of the predicted disasters, had quietly dismantled his position. He had never said he was wrong. He had simply stopped saying he was right, which from him was approximately equivalent. Elder Marin had become, in the way of things that happen naturally when they are right, something close to family. She came on the 1st of every month, stayed for 3 hours, and spent most of it with the quiet one, whose name had settled into Lyra because she had one day looked at Saraphina with those calm dark eyes and made her single sound, and the name had arrived fully formed, as though it had always been waiting. Lyra permitted Elder Marin to hold her in the particular way she permitted very few people, with full, focused attention, as though she was conducting an ongoing assessment that the elder was consistently passing. Elder Marin bore this with the quiet pride of someone who knows they are being honored and does not take it lightly. Cassiel had left the territory in the 4th month. Not exiled. He had requested it himself, in the meeting that the 3 of them had attended in the council chamber with every door open and every word spoken in the light. He had looked at Saraphina across the table, and said he needed to understand who he was when he wasn't afraid, and he could not do that here, in rooms that remembered everything he had done in them. She had looked at him for a long time. Then she had said, "When you find out, come back and tell us." He had left the following week. He sent letters, short, factual, gradually becoming something more. The last one had arrived 2 weeks ago. It was the longest yet, and it ended with a question about the pups that was not strategic, but simply curious. The question of a man who was learning to be interested in things without needing them to serve a purpose. She had written back. Gaius had added a line at the bottom. They were not there yet, whatever there would eventually mean. But the door was open, and open doors were more honest than sealed walls. Agatha married Edric on a Tuesday, because Agatha had decided that Tuesday was the only reasonable day for a wedding, since it was too early in the week for the event to disrupt kitchen operations and too late for the guests to use it as an excuse to extend the weekend. She made this announcement at breakfast 2 weeks before the date, with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone sharing a schedule update, and then turned back to her bread without inviting comment. Edric, who had proposed approximately 7 times over the course of the year in a variety of settings and received responses ranging from "not yet" to "I'll consider it" to "stop asking while I'm counting inventory," had learned to receive good news quietly. He reached over and took her hand and said nothing, which was the correct response, and Agatha let him hold it for 37 seconds before reclaiming it to pour the tea. The wedding was small and entirely organized by Agatha, which meant it was efficient, precisely catered, and structurally sound. The ceremony lasted 14 minutes. The food was extraordinary. Storm stole a roll from the table and paraded around with it for 6 minutes, before Lyra gave him one single look and he put it back. The guests witnessed this and understood, perhaps for the first time, which of the 7 was going to give the pack the most interesting future. Agatha cried once, briefly with her back to the room, during the moment when Edric said, "I have been looking at you for 6 years, and I have never once wanted to look away." She then composed herself, turned around, and informed the assembled guests that the second course was ready, and sentiment was best expressed through timely eating. Edric smiled at his plate with the smile of a man who has found exactly the right person and known it for 6 years. On the night of the first anniversary of the seal's activation, Saraphina went back to the underground chamber alone. Not with sadness, with the particular intention of someone who needs to complete a circuit, to return to the place where something changed and acknowledge the change fully. She took the stairs carefully, navigated the 3rd step, which had been repaired in the 2nd month on Agatha's direct instruction, after the 7th time someone caught it, and descended into the foxfire glow. The chamber was exactly as it had been, except for the light. The seal above the pedestal still burned gold, steady as a heartbeat. The 7 threads on the walls held their positions. But the light was different now. Warmer, fuller, the way a fire grows when it has been properly tended. Not searching anymore. Not waiting. Established. She stood in the center of the chamber and let it move through her. All of it. The full year. Everything it had cost and everything it had returned. The East Wing room. The contractions in the dark. Agatha's ladle held horizontally like a commandment. The moment she had taken Gaius's hand and felt the wall come down, not because he had dismantled it, but because she had chosen to. The 7 voices of her pups still lived in her chest from this morning's howl. She pressed her hand to the pedestal, properly this time, palm flat, no hesitation. The warmth moved through her immediately, up her arm, into her chest, familiar now, like the warmth of something that has decided you belong to it and has made its peace with that. 7 points flared, once, deep, resonant, a greeting, a confirmation. Still here, the mark seemed to say. All of you. All of us, she said aloud. Footsteps on the stairs. 2 sets, practiced now. The 3rd step no longer catching anyone. Gaius first. Then behind him, Storm. who had apparently followed his father down the stairs with the absolute confidence of a pup who goes where he decides to go and considers explanations unnecessary. He reached the bottom, looked around the chamber with his usual assessment efficiency, and trotted directly to Saraphina's side. Then looked at the pedestal, looked at her, made his sound, that emphatic, declarative, thoroughly storm sound, and pressed his small head against her leg. She reached down and felt him lean into her hand, warm and real and entirely himself. This small, fierce life that had kicked against her ribs in the dark when she had nothing else, and had been telling her the same thing every time. "We're here. Keep going." Gaius stopped beside her. He looked at the seal, at Storm, at her face. "All right?" he asked. She thought about everything the question contained. The year, the council, Cassiel's letters, Agatha crying with her back to the room, Lyra's one deliberate sound that always meant enough and right, the wall that had opened when everything else had closed, the 7 heartbeats that had been her only company through 8 months of dark and had turned out to be enough light to navigate by. She thought about the woman who had pressed her hands against stone in a cold corridor with guards on the other side and no plan, and how that woman had become this one, not because the world had finally been kind to her, but because she had decided, in the dark, to keep moving anyway. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. Storm wagged his tail. The seal pulsed gold, warm and steady and entirely without urgency, the light of something that has found its answer and is content to simply hold it now. Above them, in the chambers facing east, 6 other pups were sleeping in the configuration they had chosen on the first night and never abandoned. The twins pressed together, Lyra at the center. The smallest tucked against the largest. The castle breathed around all of them. And the territory, the full, living, breathing territory that had answered 7 voices at dawn, settled into the particular quiet of something that knows it is whole. If any part of this story stayed with you, the wall that opened, the woman who pressed her hands against stone and refused to stop, the old woman with a soup ladle who stepped between a queen and a king and said, "Breathe first, leave it in the comments below. Tell me which moment made you come back." And if you want to hear more stories about the ones who were told they were too much, too broken, too impossible, and who turned out to be exactly right, you know where to find me.